G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle, and today's episode we're going to be doing the range review for the Mechanicum. Now, strap yourselves in because this is going to be a long one, but I want to preface this with a couple of things. First, Knights and Titans is going to be their own episode. Second, I actually want to do the 40k plastics as a part of this series because quite a few of the models in 40k are used in conjunction with 30k. And several of them on their own are good replacements for units we don't currently have in 30k. Also, I want to add that the Ursarax and the Macrocarad Explorator are both not available currently, at least here in Australia. So I can't showcase those particular units. So I might do a follow-up video to this I call like Mechanicum Addendum, which will talk about, say, 40k units and the missing units, maybe with some archive images so I can talk about them. But this will just be a episode entirely revolving around what's available on the store. Now, one more thing before we kick it off is rules are not relevant here. They might pop up just generally as a point of interest along the way through this episode, but the rules do not define how I feel here. What I feel here is determined by what the models look like and how I think they fit into the background of the Mechanicum. And with that in mind, let's kick it off. So the very first one we're going to have here is Caleb Decima. So this is the Titan Tech Priest Engine Seer, but the original model that this is was used in Titans as a crew member. It's actually Caleb Decima, who is a Loyalist special character introduced to us, I think, in Book 1 of the Horus Heresy. And he's one of the Loyalist surviving Mechanicum Tech Adepts who is on Istvan and ends up being betrayed by the virus bomb, so it survives. And as far as models go, this, when it was released, was very much ahead of its time compared to other Mechanicum stuff, because the only other engine seer we had this time was the 40k engine seer for the Imperial Guard, and this model was quite a lot more complex, and I think far more down the route of being Mechanicum or Mechanicus, and I really like it for that aspect. Now, it pales in comparison to the models we have these days, as he's just so simple and plain, and, you know, he is human for all intents and purposes. He isn't some strange Baron Harkonnen floating blob in the sky. He isn't a mechanical centipede or anything like that. He's just a Tech Priest Engine Seer. And I actually really like the model for the simplicity. I think that is something that is highly underrated and is often lost in the scheme of the Horus Heresy and the way things have gone with miniatures. Sometimes simple is more. And I really like the character. Next, we have the Magos Macrotech Engine Seer and Servo Automata. Now, I've bought probably 6 or 7 of this in the past, so the one, that goes to show that I really like it, but 2, you've got to break it into 2 areas. So first, it's the Mechanicum, obviously. You're like, yep, cool. The character himself, the Macrotech Engine Seer, yep, you can use him as exactly that, or you can use him as some sort of other minor Magos or anything like that. Has some really interesting parts. Still very humanoid like the last guy, but hunched over with this big reactor coming out of his back. He's starting to become more Mechanicum, we'll call that, maybe. Now, the Automata, these guys are really interesting. So they have this little pincher arm that's on a little ball joint that goes in on the right side of the body. I found that if you took a marine missile launcher, preferably the underslung missile launcher, the one that they would hold underneath instead of on top of their shoulder, and you cut away any hand grips for the marine and glued it onto the side of these, it made a beautiful looking missile launcher for a missile launcher servitor. And this worked with any of those underslung weapons, by the way. So if anyone was curious about trying something like that, that is my suggestion to you. These guys are excellent for that, and they're relatively small size, so you get away with it quite well with them. Lovely little kit, and despite the fact that it reuses, basically there's just 2 sculpts in here, reused for the 4 servitors, they're fine. They work great. So that's a recommendation to people who want to build those into their lists. And they also make good little objective markers. So very robust kit all around here. Next we have the Silax. Now the Silax look a lot like the servo automata you just saw. The difference is these guys are huge compared to them. I think from memory they're on 40mm bases. They might be 32s though, but in any case, many times larger, at least 100% larger than the other ones are. So significantly bigger models. And they're cool, but I have issues with them from a hobbying standpoint. Such as all of these arms, at least when I got mine from Forge World, were all supplied as just long, straight arms. Which means you have to heat them up with a hairdryer or something like that, put them in the oven, whatever it might be, boiling water, choose your poison here. And bend all of these arms and little plugs and cables into different shapes. Now, I wasn't a big fan of doing this. I feel like they should have had more actual arms out of the box. I mean, the whole Dr. Robotnik arm thing here, yeah, that's cool, but, you know, it wasn't enough for me. Now, as a kit that I can take and not include all of the long, spindly octopus arms onto, there are things you can do with it, like missile servitors or, you know, that sort of thing. But the servo arm, the little miniature servo arm they have, is a fantastic conversion accessory for Marines, especially if you want to do a bunch of Warsmiths for Iron Warriors, or you want to do some Iron Fathers for Iron Hands, or you just want to do something different with Tech Marines, or maybe something cool like a Tech Marine bike with little servo arms and stuff. This kit is great for it. And I think in that regard, it's also great for the Mechanicum itself, because this gives you a bunch of parts you can use on other miniatures, such as Myrmidons, for example, to really aggrandize them and turn them into more interesting models. But the Silax on their own are not the most interesting of models. I think this is just a conversion fodder kit waiting to happen, personally. Then we have the Tech Thrall Covenant with the Mitralox, and then we'll get to the Lazalox next. I really like the Tech Thralls. Why are they resin, and why are they so damn expensive? You know, these models are simple enough in the detail that is on them that they could have been straight out of the 90s. You would have been able to buy these in a blister pack of 4 for like $16. Now it's like 10 for $93. It's just prohibitively expensive for a unit which on the tabletop has 0 staying power, except for a Feel No Pain, basically. They're not very good on the tabletop, but they're not meant to be. These are a horde unit that you can surround Magos and such with. You can take different doctrines which allow you to bring these guys on constantly. They die, they just come back onto the table. That's the sort of thing you do. Think of them more like a zombie horde, a mechanical zombie horde, you know, lobotomized servants, as opposed to, raised from the dead as such. Now, looks-wise, I think they're fine. They're perfectly fine for exactly what they should be, which is this sort of servo fodder, which is really what these Tech Thralls are. But I do think this would be a great kit to have in plastic. It would be a very simple one to put into plastic, and it should be sold in boxes of 20 for this sort of price. I think even $93 for them in resin is far too much. This should be a $50 Australian resin kit, because they are disposable at the end of the day. And there are not many sculpts. It's 3 sculpts recurring off the top of my head in this pack. So, yeah. And then we have the Lazalox. Now, I think the Lazalox are the more interesting looking weapon, by the by. But the exact same problems the other unit falls into, these guys fall into, which is just your cheap cannon fodder need to be sold for cheap as cannon fodder. Then we get to the Thalax. So we're starting off with the phased plasma fusel, and yes, technically I should have shown the unit with the pure lightning guns first, but I don't need to because you can see them in the background. Now, I really like the Thalax in all of their forms. They can be a bit brittle, especially that sort of behind the knee where the lower shin joins the upper shin. And they can be a bit of a pain in the butt to assemble at times, especially the cable coming out the end of the weapons and plugging into the back. Now, while that cable looks really cool, my advice to you, the hobbyist, is don't use it. It is too much of a pain in the butt to try and bend it and contour it into the very specific plug points that you can't pose the models how you would best like to. So I advise you against doing that. Now, as for the war gear, here we have the phased plasma fusel on the center front model. And I think the weapon itself looks fantastic. You can clearly tell it's an Imperial plasma weapon. And yet it's slightly different. It has that big bar going across the top above the radiator fins, the magnetic accelerator, blah, 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 whatever sci-fi techno babble you want to use. And it's a good looking unit. And as are the winding guns. The winding guns look great themselves, especially with the heavy chain blades on them. I really dig the Thalax as a unit. Is this the best looking version of the Thalax though? Probably not. The phased plasma fusel is pretty cool, but the IRAD cleanser the photon thruster, IRAD cleanser is coming later. Yeah, photon thruster I think is the most interesting looking weapon here because it looks the most technical. Very steampunk with the little fins with the perforations in it and such. It looks like a ray gun out of the 1950s with its 6-shooter magazine. I don't know, I just think it's really cool, and probably my pick of the Thalax weapons. And of course we have the multi-melter, which is... It's an interesting take on the multi-melter, putting a handguard around the actual perforated sort of shroud at the front of it, instead of having the handguard sort of further back, like a bolt gun. I don't know how I feel about that. I think I really like it, but I don't know, I've never really... And I've painted them. I had a few units of these, actually, with the multi-melters. I don't know. It's never fully... not 100% perfect in my mind. But we'll see. Alright. Myrmidons. I have a love-hate relationship with Myrmidons. I've painted probably 12. And that was 12 too many. I like them, but I hate them, and in fact I loathe them at the same time. The cloaks, the big, thick, static nature of them, so little you can do with reposing the body. It's really, you can just pose the weapons themselves, and the arms kind of just pivot up and down on ball joints. Unless you start chopping and changing and adding your own custom parts onto these, this is it. There are 3 sculpts, and because the heads are fixed in place, it can look very awkward when you start pointing weapons in other directions. And it can get frustrating when you don't have enough of one type of weapon produced in these kits. So in many ways, the Myrmidons, they look great in a static image like this, but from an actual hobbying standpoint, I found them a kind of frustrating unit. And I'm a guy who loves to convert and modify and make custom parts and build with. Nah, these I found just kind of annoying to build with. But other people out there might have a different experience of them. Same here with these guys, the heavier Myrmidons. All of the problems of the last unit, in fact, they are the exact same sculpts, just like Obliterators and Mutilators were for Chaos Space Marines in 6th edition 40k, and how they just swapped out the face and the arms. Well, guess what they did here? They just swapped out the arms. And yeah, I'm not the biggest fan at all of this unit because of that static posability. I mean, you can take a lot of Myrmidons in army, but you've got 3 sculpts where the legs, the chest, the head is all fixed in place, and the only thing you can change are arms. And on top of that, the arms, like you can see, the guy with the conversion beamer in the back, that conversion beamer is great. It's built to have this sort of servo skull coming out the side of it. Like, designs-wise, these look great, like I said, as static models. But this is a left arm conversion beamer. What happens if I want to put onto a guy, who is pointing the other way? It doesn't look right because their heads are facing a certain direction. And this does become an issue with this unit. And you don't get enough of any particular weapon in these units. So Myrmidons are, I found, a very frustrating experience as far as units go for both the Secutors and the Destructors. And they've got a massive tactical rock that they're molded to on the base. It wasn't just enough that they've got this huge, thick, heavy cloak. I mean, and you think the sort of environments you would find these guys fighting in would be things like Forge Worlds. where they're going to be mostly like on armored decking and stuff, fighting inside like some big reactor, and they're all slapped on top of a rock, which is a pain to get rid of because look at it. You can see for yourself, it's a massive, thick bit of rock. You have to saw that bad boy off. So, yeah, I'm not... Like I said, if you had just a squad of 3 posed like this, it works. It's when you start getting more of them, it feels so samey, and for the price, it shouldn't. And they are quite big, by the way. They're bigger than Terminators, these guys. Now, the Secretary Hoplites. I was never a fan of these kits. I felt they were, personal taste here, a bit of a shallow way of introducing some 40k Skitarii kits into 30k, and it was a bit sort of half-assed. And rules-wise, they were very frustrating for other players of, say, Marines, Militia, that sort of thing to come across because of some of the weapons and war gear you would find on the different Sectarii. I don't have as harsh an opinion toward them as I used to, but I still feel like they're missing something. I think that with the cost of the primary troop plus the cost of the resin kit combined, plus their impact on the tabletop, you're being very shortchanged. You know, there must have been a better way to do this, and this would be an ideal candidate for a fully plasticized kit, I think. Same here with the Peltists. Falls into all of those same problems, except for the fact that they didn't annoy me in the previous edition, because they weren't firing crazy amounts of haywire after jumping out of a termite that just destroys an entire group of artillery tanks with zero recourse available to the player, which was a very frustrating game mechanic, which has been mostly done away with in this edition, which I like. But again, this should be plastic. This is not worth the amount of money it costs for this upgrade kit, sadly, and I can't recommend it for purely financial reasons, but also because you don't need it in this force. There are so many other units in this army that can do most of the jobs that they cover off anything these guys can bring to the table. Speaking of, the Vorax Battle Automata, the praying mantis of automata. Now, I really like Vorax. I will say, though, that they are kind of a pain to build. The legs and the posing and the little bits that make up the claws and the feet and such, getting it all right, that can be hard. You end up balancing these models on like little paint pots and things that you've got laying around other models to try and hold them fixed in place while the glue sets. Yeah, they're a frustrating experience, and you don't want to be using too many activators and too much glue on them, because then you just spill it and get it in place you don't want it and obscure detail and such, because all these joints are very spindly. So yeah, it is an experience building them, but when they are fully done and on the tabletop, they look gorgeous. I really love the IRAD cleanser. One of them has an IRAD cleanser up on top. On the back of the torso, that looks fantastic, especially compared to sort of the, you can see how good it looks compared to the lightning guns. I mean, the lightning guns are good, don't get me wrong. It is a shame, though, that with all of these automata, they're all identical, so it is 100% up to you to pose them to make them look different. And of course, the ammunition is the very last thing you want to do when you're building these models, and you really need to heat up the ammo and the cables in order to bend them into the shapes that you need to get them to feed to the weapon. Unlike other units, this one you kind of have to put the cable on, because otherwise you've got these big ammo hoppers at the back attached to nothing, and there's a big slot in the front ammunition where the cable clips into, which you'll just have exposed if you don't have the cable plugged in. So you want to make sure you do it. But my advice is heat it up really, really hot. Other than that, Vorax are gorgeous, and we don't see enough of them on the tabletop. I was one of the first people running them in Australia. Nobody ran them for the longest time, and I was running 6 with a Praevian console because I thought it was better than Castellax. Everyone was running Castellax with Darkfire cannons. It was a long time before Vorax sort of caught on. Even then, they never were too popular in Heresy 1.0, at least in Australia. Other countries it may be different, but many Mechanicum armies would forego Vorax in favour of things like Voltrax and Castellax, both of which we're going to get to now. So, Castellax, when these first came out, it was like, wow, okay, you've got my attention. These are perfect. And it really shows with the Castellan robots of 40k. Yeah, they're plastic, much easier to build, and I would never buy them because these exist. Because the Castellan robots look awful. They're not even the cool sort of retro 50s sci-fi look, which I think they were going for. I think they look horrid. This is just chef's kiss. It's perfect. Wouldn't change anything on these models except for maybe... I don't know, as I say, like with the Vorax, like there's a servo skull and stuff like attached to the more pattern bolt cannons as like the aiming device, but yeah, I mean, you could maybe have that as a separate part. You can change it out to be just a regular sight instead of the skull, but these are mass produced in a factory. They should have a lot of sameness about them. I just really like them. I think they did a really good job. The weak point on Castellax is these little pistons you can see coming off the back of the leg and another one off the back of the elbow. They tend to snap really easy. Also, if you've never built them, you don't get instructions, and the way things join together on this body, you would not pick it. You would go, oh, that joins there. I definitely wouldn't have thought that. These big ammo belts on the back are very thick and so very hard to get hot enough to bend into the shape you want. And of course, gluing it in place can be quite frustrating because you have to use a lot of physical force with your fingers to bend it and hold it and set it in shape while trying to glue it all at the same time. And all you've got is these tiny little ball joints in the hips and the surface contact under the feet. Now, this is something that nobody ever talks about. But miniatures, especially bigger miniatures like Dreadnoughts, and this is true for Contemptors, and is true here, they have little ribbed feet, right, for the grips underneath their feet. That's all good and well for giving us detail, that when we pose them with, 1 foot up in the air, you can see all that grip and go, look at that detail. But when you glue them to a base, unless you throw a ton of glue on and make a millimetre deep puddle that they sit in, if you want to use minimal amounts of glue, so maybe you can remove it from the base later on, or you just want to hold on a temporary base for painting, whatever it might be, they are a huge pain in the ass because they give you very limited surface area. So you end up having to sand and file the underside of all their feet to get them to bloody grip the base right. And if you put them over the top of a pre-painted or pre-textured or resin base, good luck getting them to hold. This is where pinning becomes very important. But pinning is very difficult with these models because the toes are solid, but the toes have a very thin connector that you cannot see in these images that joins them to a central hub, and the central hub is hollow. And it's hollowed out with a little ball socket shape. And you glue the ball joint of the lower leg into it. If you want to drill and pin these, you have to drill through many thin layers of very brittle resin which can crack or delaminate when you are doing that. And that is a real pain in the butt from a hobbying standpoint with these miniatures. So keep that in the back of your mind. And you can also snap off toes at the same time. So a lot going on here with the Castellax, but very pretty models anyway. Now the Darkfire Cannon is probably, again, my favourite of the options here. Just like the Photon Thrusters were. So, I just think it's a very much more that steampunky, space technology feeling about it. I think it looks gorgeous, and I've got 3 in my 30k Iron Warriors army currently. Even if they're not very good this edition, I don't care. I like the look of them. And I also like the little bolt guns slapped in behind the forearms there. You can put flamers in there. Useless this edition, by the way, so probably not worth it, unless you're finding like Solar Ox Horde or something. But the little bolt guns with that top-load mag and stuff, I'd like to see that design used elsewhere. It seems to be just used on the Castellax. And the last of the Castellax, I think I really, really like the little siege wreckers, the little circ saw blades that sort of rotate through the hand. That is just so cool. I I think that is one of the coolest things going in 30k. A good little part that you can take and put onto like contempted dreadnoughts and stuff like that if you're willing to sacrifice these hands. Do I like them more than the pinchy hands? Yes, I actually do. I think the pinchy hands look fantastic, but knowing that Cirque saw blades exist as hands, like, come on, how can you pass that up? The multi-melter on the back looks like really an Astartes multi-melter. It does the job, but I'm not going to write home about it. Then we get to the Domitar Battle Automata. I think the Domitar are gorgeous. They're gorgeous as Iron Circle, and they're gorgeous here. Now, are there improvements that could be made? Yeah, they got this weird missile launcher behind the head of all weapon options available, and you can have an open or a closed one. Now, I don't even know why we want the closed one, because we want to show that it's got the weapons, for the sake of WYSIWYG. So just have the open one on display. It looks better, and actually shows the weapon. And I guess, sure, it would make sense that, for the Mechanicum in 30k, maybe they want to protect the missiles from harm on the battlefield or when the unit's in storage. But you think you're not protecting the far more technological and complicated weapons in the form of the grav weapons on its forearms from any danger. They got all these exposed little hoses and little knobby bits that can be snapped off. And yet the missiles are the thing that, recessed and protected. Just strikes me as a little bit strange, that's all. But yeah, looks-wise, it is a perfect successor to the Castellax. And I've got to say, now we need the Arlatax. We've had rules for it for a long time and still no model, but we're looking at basically one of these which can jump pack / fly. And is very much in a close assault version. That would be very interesting to see. But as for this model, I think it's gorgeous. I love it absolutely to bits. Then we get to the Voltrax, and you can clearly see the Blight Drone influence in here. I think it's just a perfect 30k rendition of what did the Blight Drone probably look like before Nurgle came along, basically. Before we strapped a demon into, this body. And, yeah, these are big. These are bigger than a Rhino tank. I don't think people appreciate that. Like, height-wise, they're bigger than a Rhino. They're a similar length and a little bit narrower. They're big. They are very good at killing vehicles and such because they have this haywire weapon up front, which looks, to be honest, nothing like any of the other grav haywire weapons we have. I mean, you go back one slide here to the Domitar and look at his graviton weapons. Much more traditional, has the standard sort of muzzle brake, has the little knobby grav bits at the back, looks like a graviton weapon. And yet the haywire weapon here, nothing like that. I don't know, I think it's a lacking of design continuity there, but apart from that, the shell on it looks like the same sort of shells that we see on the Domitar, on the Castellax, on the Vorax, and with these little engines, they look very Mechanicum. It's just that single bit of design there in that main gun that just needs a tweak, I think. But yeah, and they're a big heavy resin piece, of course. Worth $200 each. Oh no! Uncle Mao that. Alright. The Thanatar, in particular, the Calyx. So the Calyx was in a bad place last edition. Terrible, terrible rules. This edition, much better. It's got this interesting sort of graviton hammer on the right arm. I think it looks awful. There are just so many ways that they could have tackled it. I think it was the wrong way. Like a big, heavy siege fist type thing works when it's like just a purely mechanical blunt force trauma. This is a piece of sophisticated graviton technology in its hand. I feel it should look a lot more refined, than this mixture of different sized barrels, and it just feels too haphazard for my personal taste. I think maybe even just cut it down to the single central part instead of this 3 barrels thing, because it just feels like they've been slapped on, added on, because they felt It's too similar to the other Castellax, maybe something like that. I don't know. The las cannon on top doesn't look like a las cannon either. It looks more like a sort of bastard child of a neutron laser. The last edition, it was pretty much just a las cannon. Much stronger this edition, but still, I think it would have been easy. Just give it the neutron laser rules, just the same as the Seeker and Venator has, and call it a day. As for the Thanatar's body itself, yeah, again, they killed it with the design. It looks like a giant Castellax. You clearly can see that they're from the same manufacturer. They have the same sort of reactors, the same sort of ammunition hoppers and loadouts, and again, the same flaws with construction, as in you've got to bend a lot of thick, heavy cables on these models. Pinning them to their bases is a pain in the butt. Things want to snap on you because of weight-related issues. This is the Lizzo of the 30k lineup. Sue me, I don't care. And they can be a bit of a pain in the butt to build because of that. Speaking of the regular Thanatar, which is a gorgeous model, especially in this simple red Mechanicum paint scheme. The plasma weapon on the back. So it comes with like this solid ring on top that you glue on separately because they need to cast all the detail inside. Part of me wishes that we had the option of one that was opened up almost like the petals on a flower. Like with these leaves, like open and close to cool down the weapon or when it's firing or something like that. It just looks like it should do that. And the fact that it doesn't has always been a disappointment to me. No fault of the model or anything like that. Just would have been an awesome alternate design that, some mechanical articulation going on there. I think if they ever modeled like a 3D representation of this for a computer game, that's what it should do, fire a big plasma mortar into the air, and then as like the plasma ball leaves it, the petals like spring open, and then like all these gas vents, and then they like close back in, seal up, fire the next shot. That would be just, I can picture it in my head, and hopefully you can now. And you get a bit of an idea of the size here. Marines are knee high on them. They're big boy models. I don't like the asymmetry of the two arms. You've got sort of a smaller, strong hand on the left, which has the twin Mauler pattern bolt cannon on it, but the right arm has nothing. I guess because they felt that they had the massive cannon up on top, and it needed this asymmetry to balance out that big cannon. But, well, again, this is just a big Castellax, and the Castellax has weapons on both arms, so why didn't this? Instead of having the twin Mauler pattern bolt cannon, maybe they could have had just one on each arm, and it would have been just like the single bolt gun on each arm of the Castellax. It would have been a good callback, I think, just for showing that it's a homogeneous series of designs. Then we get to the Krios. Now, I have some designs of my own that I'm doing in the background for some Mechanicum vehicles. And I think these are gorgeous, especially listening back to the original designers talking about this back in my day. Back in 2012 and 13. So they spoke about these tanks, and they said, look, traditional tanks always had tons of armor in 40k. And then you got alien tanks, which have all different kinds of variations of either organic ones or mishmash of the orcs. They said, with the Mechanicum, they wanted to do something different, which was to represent that they are so high technology compared to the rest of the Imperium that they're using things like force fields instead of traditional armor to protect their vehicles. And I thought, what a cool way to do your designs. So these Mechanicum vehicles here are exactly that. They are using force fields and such, so they don't have traditional armor. They just sort of have a framework that's almost like you can imagine armor plates being able to be retrofitted over the top. And they have these big sort of flywheel-looking things on the sides. Almost like these are some sort of ancient, I don't know, if anyone's seen like agricultural equipment like steam engines from the 1800s, I'm not talking trains here, I mean like tractors and steam engines, where they have giant castings and flywheels. It feels very much like that, and I think it's a really, really cool aesthetic. And I like it. And I like that the Magos at the back that's driving this is just in this little snail shell sort of like the space jockeys from Alien. He's just sitting in his little seashell in the back here, controlling things. Ties into the rest of the range having that shell. That is not to be overlooked. That is a great little homage. And the shroud, the perforated big shroud over the top of it, again, goes back to some of the other units in the range having those sorts of shrouds. So it ties them in together to make them sort of blend into a single homogeneous force. And I like his convoluted little layout on his dashboard and stuff. And it's such a unique and interesting look. I think these are gorgeous. And it's very cool how it elevates on these gigantic gears to raise and lower these guns. I don't think I've ever seen anyone with them modelled like pointing right up in the air like this, although it is a cool look. Everyone just builds them like this, so that they're firing across the table as a main battle tank does. But interestingly, these are a big, welded to the centerline, no articulation side to side, but in previous editions they had a 45-degree firing arc. Just a funny quirk of the design. And then we have the Venator, which was frankly just so strong and overpowered in the previous edition, it really overshadowed its cousin. I like the little force generators for the flare shield either side of the I guess we'll call it the mantlet siege shield, either or. And the little sort of fleur-de-lis looking symbol in here starts to tie it into the knights, for example, and their iconography. And we see a lot more of that sort of arrowhead. It's not a fleur-de-lis, but I'll call it a fleur-de-lis anyway, because this arrowhead design pops up a lot in the 40k Mechanicum range as a trim accessory to his. Heaven forbid there was just straight lines around the trim of a panel. And then we've got these sort of little, almost like transformer looking things that stick out each side of the gun. You could just imagine a big arc of lightning, like something out of Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory going across. It's alive from side to side. I don't know, it's just a cool design. I never understood why it was a plasma weapon. I guess it has the ribs and stuff, but it very much functioned as a plasma weapon in Heresy 1. I don't know, it's just cool. Cool can tank. You can't really go wrong with the Krios. It's just a shame they haven't brought out any more versions of it yet. I feel like this is a great spot in the range to expand upon things. Give us different Krios so that people can take more interesting Mechanicum vehicles. Instead, we have the Triaros, which I don't dislike. I don't dislike them as a vehicle. I think they've had some pretty funny rules, especially the ramming rules that they had last edition were hilarious. I almost wish they'd done something different with the doors. They look good. They look great, in fact, these side hatches. But I feel like having just the open tunnel going into the inner hull and having the actual hatch at the inner hull might have been cooler, like it's an open docking port type thing. It has all of the same sort of trim and such, the same wall pattern bolt cannons. It very much ties into the range, but things feel a little bit less well put together on this design. Like, it has these big cogs at the back, but what are they doing? They don't have to lift and elevate anything like they do on the Krios, so they're just non-functional big cogs. These giant gears. Why? Don't know. Same as this little exhaust thing at the back has clearly got gears mounted into it, but then they're just solid part of the hull. They clearly don't rotate, or I don't know. There's some weird quirks, but none of it ruins the design for me. I think they are a gorgeous looking vehicle. I think the Macrocarrot Explorator looked better. But at least these do tie in with the Krios design, and it works for me. Should it be the primary transport of the Mechanicum? That's a different thought for another time, perhaps. It does have a sort of land train feel to it, which is neat, but yeah. And with the way that they sculpt these for the ease of, manufacture, they've filled in the gap between all of the wheels all the way around. It's just solid resin, which is pretty. Did the same thing on the Krios. I don't like it on either of them. but it does make casting it a lot easier, so I can forgive it, I guess. Then the Karachnos, which is... Man, I don't know how I feel about it. I think the design having the little segments on top open up to fire out those mortars, okay, that I'm cool with. I think that is a creative use of the hull. But the little arms off the sides, just slung like that, I don't know. We literally do not see anything like that anywhere else in the game. There is nothing like that in the Mechanicum range. Everything is like hard pointed on to something else. I think I would be a lot... I don't hate the design. I just think it's out of place with the design aesthetic of everything else. Because it's the only thing. Like, Titans don't have it. Everything in Mechanicum... Even look at the previous slide of this tank. See, it's got these ball joint little point defense weapons. They're mounted on the hull. The Maul pattern bolt cannon is mounted into a socket on the hull. Krios, yeah, it's all part of it. But we go back to Thanatar. The weapon is embedded into the back onto this sort of limited pintle mounting. And the Maul pattern embedded into the arm. So we have all of those, and yet when we get to this vehicle, they're not embedded. Like, maybe they should take the place of the side hatches, or maybe, I don't know, there was these ball joints that, so many things they could have done here, but didn't. I don't know. Again, it's not the worst in the world. I don't hate it or anything like that. I just feel like it's at odds with the other Mechanicum designs we've seen, because there is nothing like it. Not even in 40k, I don't think there's anything like this for the Mechanicum. I like seeing a continuous design philosophy, and I think if they introduce 2 or 3 more units with this type of design, that would change my opinion. But right now, it's just this cancerous growths out of each side of the hull. It doesn't make sense to me. Then we have the Drildo, the Ordinatus Actaeus. So this thing is huge. It's the Ordinatus body, which again, look, pintle weapons, sponson weapons on each side on like a ball joint. They're not... Again, this would have been the perfect place to have those little arms come off. You could have those little arms coming up off that middle sort of hull carriage, and they could hang out over the tracks and pivot in different directions, but they don't because of where they're attached. But yeah, it's a giant drill. There's not an awful lot you can say about it. The carriage that holds it is fine. It looks very much like a train. In fact, it looks more like a big Caterpillar excavator or a big like D9 dozer sort of style tracks have just been ripped off and slapped on the sides. The Drildo itself, I hate the paint style of it. Not gonna lie, that big bright blue like reactor glow at the back, it just looks dumb. I'm fine with having that little reactor at the back, the very, very tip that glows, but the sides there, if it is some sort of like heat shroud, I didn't need to be painted glowing blue. It takes away from the look of it. It's cool that it's got all like the mining teeth, like all these carbide mining teeth on it, but it's also got all these melters, so I don't know how much mining it needs to actually do when it's got all those melter arrays. I don't know, you can use a spoon or you drop it into liquid at that point, The hatch on the side is not very well defined. You can tell it's there because of the segments, but I don't know. The rounded hatch here looks a lot better, I think, a lot more defined than the other ones. So I like that aspect, but on the whole, out of all of the range, I think this is the weakest entry so far, and not the biggest fan of the vehicle. So I hate to say it, but that's just sort of where I think I sit. As for these little things, these little like rocket booster ammo things, I don't know what the hell they're for. Maybe they feed into it internally and shoot out these little melter ports like torpedoes. I don't know. I don't know why they're on the outside. They look like they'd be a really fragile component waiting to explode. Like, I need to melter bomb this thing. Where am I sticking the melter bomb? Right there looks like a good spot. Anyway, then we have the Ordinatus. So this is the Autor. We also have the Bellicosa Volcano Cannon variant. I think that these sort of carriages, which look like miniature Krios, and they're in that Mastodon style of small set of tracks up front, large set of tracks up the back, is a good look. With the big void shield generator in the front center, yep, that's cool. That all works for me. The gun itself, though, I don't really like. I think having the steampunky fins with the perforations in it, that's cool. Having the sort of 1950s radar dishes with the little antennae out the front type look, that's cool. But combine them all together, it feels like they just had to fill up as much space as possible on the model, and none of it really impresses me. Same as all these pipes at the very back of it. Where are they going? What are they doing? They're just coming out and back into the exact same spot on the vehicle. Maybe they could have done something more interesting there with some of these pipes. So this massive telescope sight on the side of it. Feels like maybe they could have put some of that big sight up the front here, filled in some of the blank space underneath the weapon. Yeah, I do like the control array at the back, though, that curves around with, like, the crew. The fact that it's got a little miniature servitor on, like, the Volkite at the back, which is glowing like a plasma for some reason. The little servitor there, that's cool. I like that. I wish there were more units like that, actually, in the game. Or have a couple of these servitors up the front instead of these little dinky side sponsons. Put a couple of them on, like, little mounts on each side, maybe sitting above the track in like a little separate cupola. I don't know, something. It feels like something's missing from this model, and it's just big and it's bulky and it's well detailed. I'll give them that. They put a lot of detail into it. Just, it's superfluous detail, non-functional detail. I don't know. It's just not my cup of tea, and I know, for me personally, the test is very simple. If a model is good or not is whether or not I want to buy one. And I don't want to buy one of these, even if it was cheap, which is, oh boy, is it not. Then we get to the second last model on this journey, which is Archmagos Dracovic. So he has the Abeyant here. This Abeyant is a really easy conversion you can do, where you get a Mechanicum Dune Crawler, and you build the legs of the Dune Crawler, and then you put the Abeyant, you take off the little tentacles on the underside, or don't glue them on the first place, and attach the Abeyant directly onto the Dune Crawler's legs, and that looks cool as hell. It makes it a lot bigger, but hey, it's real cool is the most important thing here. Now, Dracovic, his physical body is kind of crap. It's just another one of these monopose, not much you can do with it sort of bodies. I don't like these cables that just sort of stand straight up in the air coming out the back of the head. I think they look kind of crap. The coolest thing about the model is his head, which is the Dracovic sort of horse skull, Xenos dog skull, whatever. You don't have to use that head. There is a regular Magos head somewhere here, there you go, that you can use instead. Yeah, it's much for muchness. You don't have to include all these servo skulls hanging off the sides. I personally didn't, because I mounted my Abeyant onto the Dune Crawler legs, like I said. I thought it was such a simple conversion. When I'd done it, I hadn't seen anybody else do it. Now, a few people have done it since, but it's still not super common. I would strongly urge people to consider it as a conversion idea. Kind of like when I did my Minotaur, how I made my the Minotaur for the Astartes using the Aquator Bombard's body. Same sort of thing. For whatever reason, my brain works in weird ways where I go, I reckon I can put that kit with this kit. And it often works. I'll have a moment of pride here to say it often works. I don't get what all these little window-like things are for. Is he got like an epic scale crew inside? You know, there's 8mm Marines running around working inside. But the control panels and such, all that is cool. The Abeyant itself and its design is pretty awesome. Interesting thing to note with the Abeyant is that on the front you'll see there's a little graviton barrel sticking out the end. You are supplied with, I think, 4 different weapons in this kit. That is where they go, and you get to pick one. Yeah, you can magnetize it, but here you go. A little rotor cannon, a melter, and a conversion beam of barrel, in addition to that graviton one. And it's actually good that in this kit, unlike many, it actually shows you all the parts laid out that you get. And you can see this sort of just a lump that is the body of the Magos. Yeah. I do like that his base, though, when you put it on its 40mm, forms the upper deck of the Abeyant. That's a cool little touch, cool little design feature. So you can mount him on foot still, and that just slots out to use as his base on the ground. Really cool. So on the whole, really do like it. It's the body of Dracovic. I feel like another Magos's body could be used in this place. For Dracovic, it works because he's so far gone. He's like a few bits of leftover robot pieced themselves together and added more bits of scrap, and he made himself a new body out of scraps through sheer anger and willpower. That's cool for him and his backstory as a character, but as the regular Archmagos, it doesn't really work for me. I would strongly suggest, again, as I did, putting a different Mechanicum Magos onto this base. It works better, preferably one of the 40k ones. And then the last stop on today's journey is Anacharis Scoria, Big Daddy Pimp Stick. One of the most broken miniatures in first edition Heresy, kind of broken in 2.0 as well. Yeah, they took the Scoria part and just went full hog at it with the Scorpion King, hey? I'm fine with the fact that this is one of those more crazy Magos. I do prefer the more simple style of Magos, like with Caleb Decimer at the very, very start there, Tech Priest Engines here. But this works because he's meant to be like the Mechanicum's big bad. Basically, the only guy sort of higher in the food chain is probably the Fabricator General himself. So this works. I don't get some of the design ideas. Like he's got these 2 like big metal plugs just going. They're just ripping through the skin of his arm. Like, there are 2 bones in there that are, and all the tendons and ligaments that hold. Like, what are they holding to now? How can he even use that hand, even minus the open wounds and the infection? What the hell? It doesn't make sense. But anyway, he's Dark Mechanicum. I guess he can get away with it. And he's got his little strong hand here on the other side where the weapon's morphing sort of out of the leftover couple of fingers. I don't know, there's some weird body horror stuff going on in there. I don't think all of it works, though. Yeah, it's a pretty cool model. I'll give him his due. He's a very cool looking model. I do like that they're like pre-curved, all of these body parts. I don't get why, though, he has like random Xenos skulls that form the barrels of his weapons. This one looks like a Skaven almost. Yeah, probably didn't need them. They're just extra things plugged into this like middle ball joint. Just the one tail would have been fine instead of the 3. Is it like a tridecimer thing that he's got going on here? The Irad Cleanser Photon Thruster story on top there looks great. It's a very busy model. A very busy model on a busy base. He's fine, but he's not at the high end of my character series models. This is sort of a 7 out of 10. Well and truly above acceptable, but nothing to write home about, I don't think. Anyway, that takes us through the Forge of Mechanicum. Like I said, I need to do 2 more videos to really fully round out Mechanicum. One talking about a lot of the 40k Mechanicum, because so much of it is used in 30k. As well as the Knights and Titans will get their own video. Anyway, that's it for me. I've managed somehow to keep this under an hour. So with that, leave your thoughts and comments below on the range review, and I'll catch you on the next one.